Hello and welcome back to another discussion video on this channel. Today I'm talking about realism in video games, and specifically Elden Ring is my overarching example here. When I'm talking about realism, I also mean, or most likely mean, believability, because there are some key differences, but I'm using the word realism to describe believability. So, what is realism in video games? Because usually, what is realism? If something doesn't exist in the real world, then it's not real, right? Then it's not realistic in a video game. And that would be boring. So, what would be real in a video game defines the world and the story of the world the game plays in, if there is a world, right? So, for example, Elden Ring has magic, the magic system, and, well, magic itself in a story is a big part, so it's realistic in the sense of Elden Ring. How does it become realistic, though? How do you make something realistic or believable in your video game? Well, you need to show or tell the player in an authentic way. For example, or same example with magic, NPCs are using magic, you can use magic, NPCs are talking to you about magic, right? It's part of the story. Magic is a big part of Elden Ring, and thus it's believable. The game shows and tells you that it's part of the world. So it becomes realistic and also believable. It's made in a way so that it's believable. If we go over to another game, let's say almost every military shooter, not every military shooter, let's go over Counter-Strike or Call of Duty or something like this, right? We have a fairly realistic setting, even without background story, right? We have one group fighting another group. Well, the premise is a bit unrealistic. It doesn't matter. It's a fairly realistic setting with real life objects even, right? In them. I mean, the modern and the past titles, not the futuristic title. It doesn't matter. But then you have weapon skins. You have a soldier, a fairly serious looking soldier, running around with a pink weapon with enemy characters on them. And the NPCs are not, or the characters, the player, there are no NPCs, they're not reacting to that thing in any way, shape or form, right? It's just in the game, so you have progression and expression as a player in the game itself, right? So something like this wouldn't exist in the world. Like, you wouldn't find a customized, skinned up weapon in the campaign, for example, of Call of Duty, and maybe as a joke, but you wouldn't find it in a serious setting there, so it's something unrealistic and unbelievable. If you would say, or if you would tell me, like, no, this exists in this world, it's fairly common in this Call of Duty world that people, that soldiers in this world run around with, like, pink weapons and enemy characters on them. No, I won't believe that, right? It needs to be told or shown, but on the other hand, Call of Duty is not really a story-driven game, right? So the idea doesn't really, or the example doesn't really work, but it still works, if it makes sense. So what happens if it's not explained to us? Then the game is probably immersion breaking. Imagine you're playing like a fighting, like medieval fighting simulator game, fairly serious, with a nice story, even something like what is it game, like Kingdom Come Deliverance or whatever it's called. Never played that game, but it looked fairly realistic, right? And authentic, somewhat authentic, whatever. Imagine there was like all of a sudden a spaceship in the air. That is not only unrealistic but also unbelievable, right? Like, they can't somehow explain this. this game is not about alien invasion, right? It's a medieval whatever game. So that not only would be unfitting, that would be unrealistic, unbelievable, silly, stupid, whatever. Right. So it's immersion breaking, it's sometimes even... what's the word? Somewhat offensive, right? But yeah, now let's come back to Elden Ring, because I have in front of me a list of examples for well-defined realism, or fairly believable things in the world of Elden Ring. And then I have a list with some not so well defined realism, like poor realism, unbelievable things. But to that list there's a big but, so keep an eye out for that. But let's start with the pro list, so to speak. I mean, magic was already an example, so I'm not using that again, but I'm using Radahn and his horse for well-defined realism. Because if you look at it, like this big dude riding on this normal-sized, emaciated horse, or yeah, it's a horse, right? I mean, I'm looking at the donkey right in front of me right now, and I was thinking about, is it a donkey or is it a horse? No, it's a horse, right? Radahn's steed is a horse. But how is it possible that he can ride this thing? Well, the story, the lore is telling you that Radahn mastered gravity magic, and you can not only read it, you can also see it when you fight him, right? He uses fairly frequently his gravity magic to do attacks. And he's using gravity magic to lift himself up so the horse can carry him. And there's actually a very wholesome story surrounding him and his horse, like why he even wants to do that, why is he not just walking around, right? That's part of the culture, that he has a horse. So it's fairly well established in the lore, and thus it becomes believable and it makes sense and is realistic. Then another thing is, or another example for well-defined realism would be the undead. Usually in fantasy games you have a lot of skeletons and undead. Sometimes you have a necromancer resurrecting them. Sometimes they just exist because, well, skeletons always existed in fantasy video games, right? So my video game also has skeletons. Never explained why, but in this game you have Deathroot. Deathroot being the corruption coming from the corpse of Godwyn the Golden, which creates, or which is part of the creation process of undead. And it's well explained, well defined. So, and I mean, where can you find the undead? Sometimes on the overworld, and more often than not also in catacombs. Catacombs and stuff, graves, make sense. There are a lot of undead. The root spreads to almost everywhere. So, yeah, when you see undead, you most likely also see Deathroot around. And if not, it's clearly fairly close, right? Then another example would be the different races and inhabitants of the world, like with normal humans, whatever Kali is he supposed to be a human? He looks very slim, like his Kali's race looks very slim. It might be just humans, just a strange kind of human, right? We have Albinorics, who are artificially created, like different generations even. We have Omen, we have Misbegotten, and every one of them, like we have Trolls, every one of these creatures has their own story. And they fit into the game, into the overarching game, because there is so much story surrounding them. Similar to skeletons, like my game has a skeleton, like every fantasy game has skeletons and undead and zombies, and also giants, so I put giants in here. My game has giants because every game has giants, and it's not very well explained. We have trolls here. I don't know if it's explained where they come from, but they're actually used in the world, right? They're used, like, they're big and strong, so they can carry a bunch of stuff. Like, they use them to carry around these wagons or whatever these things are, where you can loot the weapon at the end. And there is this mystique around them. This is something that Elden Ring, and not only Elden Ring, but not almost every From Software game does, is it plays with how much information they give you. Sometimes it's hidden in like world building details, right? There's maybe a a campfire that went out, and then you see like the footsteps going somewhere. Like these small visual details, visual cues was just an example with the campfire there. Sometimes it's just written down in the item description. Sometimes it's a very specific dialogue from an NPC, and it's written or explained in a way where it feels authentic. It doesn't really feel out of place, but it's also not as direct. And because it's not as direct, there are a bunch of gaps in the explanations, right? And it creates a this mystique around them. Like, sure, they could say something directly, right? This exists because of that, and this is how it works, but that would be boring. Like, they're telling a story. They're not writing a what's it called, a dictionary, so to speak, right? They write a intriguing, interesting, and just outright nice story without with this talking around stuff and leaving things vague and leaving things out. And I mean, it works. And it also it's like they're walking the line sometimes, almost, right? Where it's when they would leave out more information, then something becomes unbelievable, right? Because there's so many gaps, you can't possibly think of the reasoning why something is the way it is. But again, they're walking the line and they stay on the good side most of the time. I can't think of a bad example, so they're probably almost on the line. Sure, sometimes they're cutting the content out, but whatever. Now let's go over to the not so well explained list of things. And the but. Because for all of these things I have a big but, right? It's on my bad example list or poorly explained list, but there's a reason for almost all of these things. But let's start. First thing, and you probably know what's on this list. If you don't, you haven't seen my other videos. It's elevators. Because elevators in this game make no sense most of the time. Because how do they work? There is, like, how does an elevator look in this game? Like, you have on the elevator itself, it's most of the time, or almost every time, a platform with a pressure plate on there. If you step on the pressure plate, the elevator goes up or down, depending on where you are right now. And on the entrance exit, or on the 2 levels, you have a lever to call the elevator to you, right? If the elevator's down and you're standing upstairs, or on your up, you pull the lever and the elevator comes up. The mechanism behind that thing doesn't exist. Like, no, it's a very unrealistic thing, especially with the pressure plate. Sometimes, like, you can't connect this pressure plate to whatever mechanism is behind there. It makes no sense, because they haven't shown me that. Imagine this game would have a steampunk setting, right? A, like, what's the game called? Maybe the Lies of P setting. There, the elevators would be, or are, much more believable because they have technology there, right? In this game, we don't really have that advanced technology. At least it doesn't feel like a game with that advanced technology, so it's unbelievable. What is more believable, what would be more believable, or what is more believable, are the elevators leading into the underground, like the Einzel River or Siofra River or whatever it's called, these elevators are much more believable because they're powered by magic. When you step on the pressure plate, the platform you're standing on starts to glow, or certain spots start to glow, and you're being magically transported up and down. Even the sound design indicates that it's magic, right? But then the elevators in, for example, what's it called here, Stormvale Castle, there should be a mechanism behind them, and it doesn't make any sense. Then another example, houses. Lots and lots of houses. Some of them are too small, some of them are not tall enough for two-story buildings. Windows are too small, maybe the entrance is too small, no decoration whatsoever. Like the place where it's standing sometimes makes no sense. And all of that good stuff, like houses in this game. If you have a look at the Windmill Village, for example, where all the crazy ladies are dancing around. If you have a look at all these houses, they look in... what's the word? You can't live in them, basically. Uninhabitable, I think, right? What a difficult word. Like, they look crooked, they look wrong, right? They look just wrong. Even the houses in, what's it called, Leyndell, they look way too small and stuff like that. Like, shit is being downscaled even in small houses. Then where are the fields? Another example, right? If this is supposed to be a land where you can live in, where are your crop fields and farms? Like, we have a windmill village, but where are the fields? Where are the crops? Where's the wheat being harvested? Where does it come from? Where's the food source coming from? Where do you get your meat from? From hunting? Sure, maybe, but there's no indication that there are hunters out here. You know, right? Things like these. These are the small things that I always criticize. But again, there's a big but. Another example is the downsizing of major cities and structures. We had a talk about that in another video where I was talking about something, level design, right? Where I said Leyndell should be much bigger, like Leyndell, well, and it's true, if Leyndell should or was a realistic city, this thing would be much larger, but of course the gameplay would suffer under that, so they can't make it much bigger. Not for an open world game, but if you want to know more about that, watch the other video. And then we have a lot of combat magic as well, like all our magic that we can use is only combat magic, but there's no indication that there is utility magic, like everyday utility magic, because you're most likely not fighting every day, right? There must be some magic that can be used to do mundane stuff, right? I mean, you can already carry around stuff with gravity magic, but there must be other appliances to magic other than, hey, I create this destructive force, right? So these things are fairly poorly translated or explained. They're sometimes unbelievable. But now let's get to the big, juicy but that I was talking about. And I'm not talking about the ass, I'm talking about the butt with one T, of course, which is storytelling. This game is a story. This game feels like playing this game while looking at the story feels like, do you know these TV shows where a grandfather or something or someone is telling their grandchildren a story, right? You have the grandfather sitting in a chair, having a big book in their hands, and then there are like the son or a few children sitting on the ground and listening to the story they're being told. Right? This is how Elden Ring feels like, and this is how it should feel like. It feels like a story, like epic story being told to you. doesn't matter that some things make no sense, because, like, you wouldn't mind. Would you care about an elevator that is unrealistic? No, you use this elevator, you go up and down. Okay, that's it. Maybe it looks nice, but doesn't make sense. Doesn't need to make sense. Not necessarily. If it's magic, fine. If it's not magic, like, a magical elevator wouldn't really fit into Stormvale Castle. Aesthetically, that wouldn't fit in there, right? So, but it fits into the Siofra River, for example. It would fit also in, what's it called, Raya Lucaria, right? Magical elevators would be nice there. But, right, it's a story being told. If you're looking at the houses of the mad women dancing around and being happy about skinning someone alive or something, right? It just helps the storytelling, right? Something is not right in this village, and then you look at the houses and they're crooked and they're wrong as well. This helps the storytelling. This is a storytelling, what's it called? Not aspect, but it's a feature, right? It's a feature of storytelling. Same with fields. Do you need fields and farms in this game? I mean, we have a small farm, like we have a small stable or farm area in front of the windmills, like a very small area. You couldn't feed that many people that exist in this world with that, but it's not important. It's not important to the overarching storytelling. Is it important that the cities in this game are small? No, it's not. I mean, would it be important in Skyrim? I mean, yes, someone would be nice to have a bigger city, but it's not that necessary. And why do I want utility magic in this game, right? Like, what can you do? This is not a sandbox game. You don't need utility magic, like non-combat utility magic, like whatever. A spell that lets the cheese come out of the fridge or something. I don't know. They don't have fridges, I know. I mean, maybe they have an ice block with whatever. I mean, they could power their fridges with ice magic. That would be nice, but something like you don't need this in this game. It's nice to have, but it's not a necessity. And if it's hindering you from telling your story, then don't do it, right? But sure, if you want to create a game that feels more realistic and where you look and be careful what details you put into the game, then yes, make it realistic, make it believable for the world. If it's not too much to ask. So, could Elden Ring do better in that sense? Making things more realistic? Yes, I think so. They could put more effort in certain things, like elevators, for example. They could surely do it. They could make the houses somewhat believable and still be crooked. That's still a possibility. And it would be nice to see that. But is it necessary? Not really. And, well, this is what I wanted to talk about. Realism or believability in video games. If you want to make something believable, you better explain it in some way, shape or form. Or maybe you don't, and it's something unexplained. Maybe it makes sense maybe it makes sense anyways. It depends on your story that you want to tell, right? If you want to make a joke game, like a light-hearted joke game that people can play against each other or something, it doesn't need to be realistic. But if you want to tell an epic story like Elden Ring, you might want to put a bit more effort in your realism, right? So, I think the overarching theme here is it really depends on what game you're making, what story you want to tell, if things should or should not be realistic. Yeah, that's the end of the video. Let me know what you think. If Elden Ring does things well or not. Let me know if it's a major problem for you, like elevators for me. Like, I mean, that's not a big deal, but I'm still pointing it out every time I can. But yeah, let me know what you think, and that's it from me. Goodbye.